first round. We're going to go to our second round now. And Mr. Cooper, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the witness, would you support amending the Conflict of Interest Act to provide for an enforceable general anti-avoidance measure so that anyone who circumvents the Act by exploiting a technical loophole or concocts a scheme to get around the Act and its application entirely could be held accountable?
So GAR rules are in place in many other statutes in Canada, starting with the most important one, which is the Income Tax Act of Canada. Okay, so those types of rules have been used effectively to do exactly what you are looking to do, which is to avoid the ability for individuals to design legal mechanisms to avoid taxation. Now, avoiding taxation and delaying taxation are two very, very different things. So now in this particular case, if someone is creating a construct that would allow them to advance a private interest, I think this goes back to the question from Mr. Terria. Like, that's an ethical question, not a legal one. It would be interesting to see what that rule looked like. Certainly, I would be happy to comment on a rule once it's been designed, but a general anti-avoidance rule in this area, I think, undermines the whole purpose of the Act. Like, anyone who's willing to design that kind of a tool to avoid the application of the Act, they're going to find another way around it.
I would just cite one example. It's one we faced last fall when Mark Carney, before he became Canada's most conflicted Prime Minister, was appointed as, for all intents and purposes, Justin Trudeau's economic advisor. Now, as the Prime Minister's advisor, Mr. Carney should have been subject to the Conflict of Interest Act. However, Mr. Carney and Mr. Trudeau effectively cooked up a scheme whereby Mark Carney was not technically in the PMO, but instead supposedly housed in the Liberal Party as the so-called chair of the Liberal Party's task force on economic growth, as it turned out to be nothing more than a one-man task force. Mr. Carney, also that Mr. Carney could avoid accountability, skirt the law by getting around the Conflict of Interest Act, and hide his multitude of conflicts of interest from Canadians. It was a complete and utter sham. Everyone knew that Mr. Carney was advising Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau even bragged about the fact that his economic advisor was none other than Mark Carney, and yet Mr. Carney was circumventing the Conflict of Interest Act. Do you not see a problem with that scenario?
So the Conflict of Interest Act applies to people who are actually in office. So if that was an actual office that was paid for by the Crown, I think we'd be talking about something very different. It would apply to
an aide to the Prime Minister. It would apply to a ministerial aide. It would apply to a ministerial advisor. Mark Carney was effectively in that role, but yet he was able to avoid the Conflict of Interest Act. Hence the need for some sort of mechanism to address it, in my view.
Okay, so the Act applies to public office holders, and it applies, the various codes apply to the individuals who are governed by the code.
The whole point, and the whole point is to address those who are taking advantage of a loophole. Here you have the CEO of a $1 trillion investment firm advising the Prime Minister, someone who has all sorts of conflicts of interest, and yet was able to get around the Act. Yet, had he been in the PMO doing exactly the same thing that he was doing outside of the PMO, he would have been subject to the Act.
So I'll say two things in reply. The first thing I'll say is you're quite right to make these concerns known if you think that they are important to you and your constituents. I think that things that happened in September 2024 had a pretty good litmus test subsequent to that. So you say that this was something that was common knowledge and everybody knew it. Well, if it was common knowledge and everybody knew it, I guess that factored into some decisions that people made at a later date. The second thing that I would say is there's a difference between going around something and having it not apply to you at all. And I think that it would not be a good idea to have an act apply to people who are not in the public service. Okay, so you may call it a circumvention, but the threshold is whether or not they are in the public service. Now, I am not privileged to any information that may have been shared between the two individuals that you mentioned, but certainly there are other people in that office.
10 seconds, Mr.
Yeah,
Thorold.
other people in that office who understood what those arrangements were. I go back to the comment made by Mr. Theriault. It's about what the moral compass for those individuals is.
Thank you.